We've done quite a few videos on the Spitfire before, but today we're doing it again. The reason being that this one is different. This is the full history Supermarine Spitfire, and there are lots of people out there who would kill to have one. The story goes back to 1942, when a British pilot shot down a German Bf 109 over Britain and brought it back down to Earth. They landed in the sea near his ship and managed to drag it out with a crane and then get it onto his ship. It was taken back to Britain and ended up at the Air Ministry, where they decided to do a bit of reverse engineering. They took the best bits from the Bf 109 and combined them with what was available from the Spitfire to make the ultimate British fighter plane. Or did they? Well, sort of. The reality was a bit more complicated than that. See, the whole point of reverse engineering was to try and find out how the Germans made their incredibly powerful DB601 engine. But after stripping it apart, they found they didn't know any more about how it worked than they did before, so it stayed an enigma until the end of the war. And that meant that the engine had to be removed and replaced with something else. They tested various engines in the airframe, including the Rolls-Royce Vulture, which was actually supposed to be going into the Avro Manchester, and also considered putting the Bristol Centaurus in it. Eventually, they settled on the Griffin. And in order to fit this engine, major changes had to be made to the airframe. The wings were redesigned to increase the area, which changed the way the plane handled. So they had to change the tail surfaces to bring it back into balance. The wing roots were thickened to create more space for fuel, which affected the center of gravity. And they also tried to adjust the fuselage length, narrowing it at the rear and adding a fairing for the cooling fan. All of these changes had knock-on effects on other parts of the design. And even after the prototype flew, they kept making adjustments to the airframe right up until the production models were finished. In the end, it wasn't the plane that Britain needed. The focus was too much on creating a super high-performance fighter, which, while it performed well at lower altitudes, really excelled at high altitude. The thing is, Britain was locked in a dogfight with Germany, and no one was going above 30,000 feet. And so while it was fast, it was actually too fast. There were several instances where pilots pushed the plane beyond its limits and nearly lost control. Even at lower altitudes, the power output from the Griffin just wasn't enough to keep up with the enemy. And so the project was canceled in October 1944. Only 3 prototypes were ever built, and none of them are still around today, leaving us with nothing more than a few photos and some blurry wartime footage. So this model is a recreation based on the original plans and drawings. But if you think that it looks incomplete or hastily thrown together, then you'd be wrong. This is actually the result of almost 7 years of work by a team of dedicated people led by master model maker Harry Lomas. He started the project back in 2016 and used CAD files to create patterns for the metal parts. These were then sent off to be CNC machined before he welded them all together. All of the plumbing on the exterior is functional, including the air brakes and the flaps, even though they don't really need to be, because the plane can't fly. That was one of the stipulations set out by the current owner. It couldn't be converted into a flying machine, which is why there are no flight surfaces like a rudder or elevator on the tail. The entire airframe is then covered in fabric and doped exactly like it would have been in the factory back in World War II. Harry's attention to detail is astonishing. He wanted everything to be as accurate as possible, right down to the tiny fabric patches used to cover the access panels. And yet somehow he managed to finish it on time and within budget, which is a miracle in itself. That's especially impressive considering that he made the molds, built the airframe, and painted it all while working full-time as a welder and fabricator. After spending hundreds of hours in the workshop alone, the end result is breathtaking. Every rivet is accounted for, and the paint is mixed to match the original colors. Even the undercarriage is fully operational with hydraulic dampers and electric motors to raise and lower the legs. It has retractable flaps and even a working starter motor. Now, this may not look like much, but believe me, it's got a lot more detail than your average model. We've talked about this in our video on the real Spitfire before, but it's worth mentioning again here. This level of detail is a testament to the skill of the men who built these planes in the factories across Britain during the war. It's easy to forget that every panel, every pipe, every wire was handmade by a person, and each one was unique. There were no jigs or templates, no CAD or CNC machines. Everything was done by hand and eye, which makes the Supermarine Spitfire one of the most labor-intensive aircraft ever built.
Wow.
This isn't the only time Harry has recreated an aircraft from scratch. His first was the Westland Lysander in 2011, which took him 4 years to complete. And his third, which he's currently working on, is a Hawker Hurricane. Both of those are also in 1/1 scale. Harry never went to art school, and he doesn't consider himself to be an artist, but his work speaks for itself. In a world of mass manufacturing, his work reminds us that there are still people who can take raw materials and turn them into works of art. The idea of building a replica Spitfire came about after the previous owner bought the IPMS Scale Model World Modeling Show in Telford in 2014. As part of the deal, he was given a box full of old plans and drawings from the Supermarine Spitfire. He knew about the history of the full history Spitfire and thought it would be cool to recreate one in model form. So he called up Harry and asked him to build it. The two of them had worked together before on a few projects, including restoring a real Spitfire. So Harry jumped at the chance, started digging through the plans and drawings, and came up with a list of everything he needed to make. Then he drew up his own plans for building the model. As far as we know, these are the only full-size accurate plans for the full history Spitfire. Using these plans, he created patterns for each of the parts and sent them off to be machined. The metalwork was done by Ian King at Precision Profiles. And once it came back from there, Harry assembled it in his garage. That's where it sat for the next 2 years while he worked on other projects. In 2018, the model was moved to a new workshop in Gloucester, and that's where the rest of the work was carried out. Harry was working on several projects at once, including the Hurricane and the Lysander, so it wasn't always easy to find the time to work on the Spitfire. But eventually, in 2023, after almost 7 years of work, it was finished. It's now owned by a private collector who keeps it in a hangar at an airfield in Gloucestershire. From time to time, it's put on display at air shows and events where crowds gather to marvel at this unique piece of aviation history. If you want to see it for yourself, then you might be able to catch it at the Shuttleworth Collection's annual Victorious Transport Weekend, which celebrates the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. But regardless of where you see it or how, when you finally get to lay your eyes on the full history Spitfire, you'll be amazed by the sheer scale and detail of this incredible model. Built to commemorate the men who designed and built the original Supermarine Spitfire, this is a fitting tribute to one of Britain's greatest ever aircraft. Thank you for watching.